welcome to the Sellbetter Daily Sales Show. I have Anthony and Firat here with me today, and we are talking about all things prospecting. They are letting us in to see some of their approaches, their wording, how they're prospecting. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Excited to be here.
Today, we're going to chat about the step-by-step on how you both were talking me through sourcing pipeline, a couple of the frameworks and the messaging that we can borrow, steal, make our own. I would love to hear both of your perspective on kind of why people are struggling with prospecting and what you think some of those main reasons are right now. And then we'll kind of dive into the ways that we can work around that as a rep. Firat, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So from my point of view, I think most of the SDRs hate it because, as you can imagine, they do it every single day in and day out for maybe 3 years. And when they think they are done with prospecting and they become an account executive, they notice what ends up happening is that they basically continue have to doing prospecting. Otherwise, the inbound leads are never going to be enough to hit their target. They have to continue doing prospecting in addition to all the additional responsibilities of being an account executive, creating proposal, business cases, all the busy work. And it's a little bit difficult because when you reach out to someone in this noisy market that we have, we usually don't have any credibility in the eyes of a buyer. So we have near zero credibility and we are trying to interrupt them. And it's very difficult because you struggle. And if you don't believe in your product, it's very difficult and get the energy and make them to commit to a meeting. So I always look for ways to gain credibility when I'm doing my prospecting. What's your take on this, Anthony?
My take, and I don't think this should be a hot take, but for some reason it is. I see people saying outbound is dead, SDRs are dead, cold calling's dead, all these things being dead, and I just don't think that's true. However, I do believe it's evolved, right? But everything evolves over time. It's just the natural occurrence of what happens with these things. Like music genres evolve, movies evolve, and outbound prospecting is one of those things that's just evolved. And it shouldn't be a hot take. That's natural. So I don't think we can any longer rely on what worked 2 to 3, even a year ago, this traditional 27-day, 13-step sequence, which we all know after the 4th or 5th touch, you have a bunch of overdue tasks and you just move on to the next after you don't get a response. And we're sending generic emails, calls, LinkedIn messages. Your managers are telling you more activity. We end up treating every prospect the same. And we don't really understand what type of content our prospect needs. And so I think the combination of all of those things that's happening and the lack of evolution with our strategy and our mindset and approach has led to when people pick up the phone, they don't care about what we're saying. When we email someone, we don't get them to respond. When we hit them up on LinkedIn, they tell us, why are you contacting me? Because we're not putting the buyer first and what they need. We're now moving to a world where it's more of a signal-led buyer interaction approach. And you need to be able to have a high EQ to be able to read the room when you engage with a prospect and understand where they're at. You shouldn't treat a prospect who has no idea who you are the same as someone who's a champion and has used your product before. However, we're still doing that because we all need pipeline and our managers telling us make more calls. And so we're left with, we don't understand how to actually balance the two. And it's kind of a dilemma that we're faced with. So I think that's why outbound isn't working for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I previously, before mentoring, I worked in an ed tech company. And I noticed from firsthand that how advanced advertisement technology is and how we are as salespeople are behind of this technology. When you are doing retargeting, basically these machine learning and AI-driven algorithms are trying to understand how to reach out to people with what kind of messaging and which platform and which product. So there's amazingly working algorithm and trigger-based systems in these marketing technologies. But when it comes to our approaches, quite often salespeople just do random ad hoc prospecting here and there without any strategy and without research. And yeah, that's why when we only focus on the volume and not basically do our job in terms of a strategic seller, we really struggle. And that's why we struggle to build enough pipeline, have enough coverage as well to hit our targets.
Both of you. There's so many things in there where I was like, that's not me. I mean, so relatable, right? There's all these different pieces that are piled on us and like getting back to the enjoyment. And I think a lot of us find enjoyment in success, especially in sales. Like we like to win. I want to go back, Firat. In the very beginning, you were talking about this credibility piece and how you're looking to build credibility while you're getting on the beginning of these phone calls. Talk to me about some of the ways that you have found that create success in terms of that credibility building. I like to call it like my perch. Like here I am.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Especially I felt the need of having more credibility when I switched to strategic accounts. When you work with especially large organization, Fortune 500 companies, the executives and the buyers are sophisticated and they are not willing to give their time to you if you don't have credibility and if you don't know what you're talking about. I always look for the ways to gain credibility. And for me, one of the ways that work best is investing in my personal branding. I've been investing on, especially heavily on LinkedIn for the last 5, almost 8 years now, creating valuable posts that I think that can be helpful for my audience. Because when you think about it, what happens when you reach out to someone is that first thing they do, they look you up online and they come to your profile. And if they don't think that you are basically going to worth their time, they will never going to give the chance to you. So that's one of the things that I've been doing. Another thing is that even if you invest all the time in your network, you are still a stranger. One of the best things you can do is that leverage your customers and your leadership team to get a warm introduction and referrals. For me, this has been the play that worked the best, and it's by far the best meeting booking play. For me, it says 41% meeting booking rate. Talking with my, basically, first of all, finding what kind of accounts I'm trying to reach out and who is my ideal buyer in this account. And when I detect a list of people, I look at Sales Navigator and see in my leadership team, is there anyone connected to these people? You can either use Team Link for this or use connections of field in LinkedIn. And quite often we have quite successful leaders in our organization. And I sometimes find maybe our chief people officer, maybe our CEO is connected to one of the top executives. And getting a warm introduction from these people are going to be so much better than me just trying to reach out to these people because I leverage their credibility. And yeah, it's one of the best ways to open the door for me.
Can I show your warm intro that you shared with me?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And can I just have you repeat again? You said 41% meeting rate?
Exactly. So this is what I use basically to ghostwrite the message for the people I'm basically requesting to introduce me. Here in this example, I reach out to Chief Operation Officer, and I've seen that they previously worked together and they were a peer in a project. And I asked if he can introduce me. And then he said, yes, of course. They are more often than not willing to help us. And I basically wrote this message. You can read it, but I will just briefly explain the structure here. For me, how I start usually is with a personal tone, because this is not a sales email. So there should be some sort of personalization still. When I do my research, I basically get some pieces of information that I can use in the message in terms of personalization. And then I use the segue to introduce myself and what I would like to do in the meeting, why I'm reaching out to have this meeting. And then the CTA, call to action, should be a soft one. I don't usually use let's book a meeting. Would you like to book a meeting for 3 of us? Or those kind of CTAs in this meeting, because they already know each other. And when you start the conversation, it's almost always turns into a meeting anyway. So I wouldn't be salesy in these introduction messages. And this is what I write for my internal leadership team when they are introducing me.
Anthony, have you had success with warm intros too?
Yeah, for sure. I think going on LinkedIn, seeing if people are connected with someone, asking them and having a ghost written note for them ready to send on your behalf is something that I love to do. And I will just note, I love the soft CTA too. I think everyone overthinks CTAs. Like it's like the thing that's going to book the meeting. All the CTA should be aiming to do is to ask a question to understand their interest level based on what you just said in the email. So that's really like it with the CTA. And I think that was a great one for that type of email. So all in all, big fan of that approach. The warmer the intro, the better the discovery call, the more open they're going to be to chatting with you, the less their walls will be up when you speak with them.
I
Completely
think
agree.
it's so interesting. It's something that's like readily available. Both of you mentioned looking at Sales Navigator, but even looking at like if you don't have Sales Nav and you look at like your connections with people, it's always worth an ask, right? But it's something that I think a lot of people don't do. It feels like an extra thing. So I wanted to point out that both of you mentioned serving up to your leadership team, like, here's what you can say, and they can then change it or add or remove, but you're making it like the easy button for them to take that and make the connection for you. Beautiful.
Exactly. And I think I learned from Jeb Marley
Hmm.
that 91% of the customers, our customers, are very willing to give a referral, but only 11% of the salespeople go ahead and ask that. So that's crazy statistic for me, because when you do all the work and close the deal and you have very good relationship, that's the time. And maybe even after some time, when they see the result and impact, that's a perfect time to ask them for referrals. And the way I think you can operationalize is that you put some time in your calendar, maybe every 2 weeks or bi-weekly, like a weekly task. You put some time, maybe 1 hour, and select your accounts and find the people that you want to get referrals. And you ask your customers, even if they don't know the person that you're asking very well to make an introduction, what I had experienced is that they sometimes give other people and they refer you, okay, maybe Jeb in this organization could be even better person to reach out to. And then can be another source for you to not be so depending on your emails and cold calls.
Love that you mentioned operationalizing it, because we typically get sucked into, I mean, both of you, in why we don't like prospecting. We're talking about how there's so many other things that get added to our plate and we get pulled in all these different directions, and life starts lifing, and here we are, and we forget about all these other things that we can do if you build that in. So do you also do that for looking for these referrals internally too, or the soft intros, you build that into your calendar as well?
For me, what I do is that I work accounts based. When I work with a large organization, the people that I'm going to reach out to is sometimes pretty much decided, because I look at the clusters of users. We have a product-led growth motion. I look at the clusters of users, which departments they are working at, and I gather the pieces of information from this end users and frontline management team. And I usually go to executive in those departments. So I look at all the people I can reach out to. And if I see someone in my network, in my leadership team, has connection with those, my first step is going to be asking for an introduction. If there is no one, then I will think for alternative approaches.
Yeah. Okay. But it's part of your research piece.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. I want to switch gears a little bit here. And Anthony, you mentioned something that maybe hit a nerve a little too close to home for me about overdue tasks in CRMs. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that way, but I promise I won't tell. I just have to see how many of you have some overdue tasks piling up in your system. I see there's a small percentage of people who might be on the same level as me right now. We won't talk about it. We won't tell anybody. Talk to me about, there's so many different frameworks that we can prospect with. And here I'll share my screen. What are you using? What do you like? What's helping you when it comes to not having this pile up,
Yeah.
especially with all that's on our plates? I see some people in the chat here too talking about all the extra things they have to do.
Yeah. So my take is that it shouldn't take you 10 to 12 touches if you're outbounding in the right way to get a response, whether that's a referral, whether that's a no, whether that's a meeting, whether that's a response to content you sent them as a value add. It shouldn't take you 10 to 12 touches. And that's why I think the typical Agoji sequence that you've seen with outreach, I think is just outdated and we need to adjust. So what I like to do, starting at the top, this is called the 5x5. And so based on your sales math of how many prospects you need to be contacting, you want to build a framework for yourself that allows you to stay disciplined every day and stay consistent. So for me, that means 5 accounts and 5 contacts in each account per day. So that gives me 25 new prospects that I'm putting into a sequence. But what I'm doing is I'm using number 3 to research my accounts. So I'm looking for what are my top 5 reasons to reach out to someone that's relevant to them. And then when I'm doing my research, I'm looking for the outlets that get me that information quickly. So it could be if they're hiring and what's within that job description. It could be something an executive mentioned on a podcast. It could be a 10K. So a tactical piece of advice for you all is list the top 5 to 10 triggers or your signals that give you a good reason to reach out to someone, and then figure out where you find those signals and then build those into your process so that when you open your laptop on a Thursday morning, you're not wondering, here's this account where I'm going to go here and then there, and then hopefully I find something. No, you open your laptop, your 5 things you're looking for and where to find them. And so you can go quickly to find those things. And then you can use a problem statement within the email or your cold call to connect the signal or the trigger to the problem that they may be running into based on what you saw. And so for me, what that allows me to do is have a very scalable approach that's relevant to the prospect. And the data tells me that if I approach it through that lens, it won't take me 10 to 12 touches to get a response, because I'm basically saying, here's this thing I saw. Typically, when I work with customers, they run into these issues. Here's how we've solved it. Is that something that you've ran into also? That's not exactly what you'll say, but that's the mindset. And so instead of saying, here's all the cool things we do, it's putting it back in their court and saying, here's what I've found about your business. Here are some problems that I've heard from customers we actually work with that you could be running into. Here's how we solved it for them based on achieving these outcomes. Is that something you're thinking about? Have you already started trying to solve it? And then really getting an understanding if this is interesting to them or not. And usually you'll get, hey, we are focused on that, or we're using a competitor, or I'd love to see more content on it, whatever the case is. But yeah, when you make it about them, they're more inclined to answer.
I think that's so important. One more time. When you make it about them, they're more inclined to answer.
Yeah, I completely agree. It also helps with the timing, right? When you think about it, 95% of the buyers are not in the market most of the time. When they're actively looking for a solution in your category, you want to target them. And a trigger-based approach really helps with that. Some of the triggers in my organization is if an organization is having a merger and acquisition, if they got investment, if a specific department is growing very fast and they're hiring there. And one of my personal favorite one is if a new leader joined an organization, a high-level executive joined an organization, it's probably a good time to reach out to those people. In my previous organization, we went to LinkedIn office in Paris and we reviewed more than 2,000 LinkedIn messages. And what we have seen there is that when we reach out to people less than 1 year in the organization, the conversion rate of those messages, the reply rate, is 32%.
Mm.
which is extremely high when you think about outbound. But when you look at the average, for example, someone who has been in the organization for 4 years, the response rate was around 15%. So timing is super important as well. And playing around with the trigger-based outreach really helps with the response rates.
Completely agree. And I think like being aware of what's going on in your accounts, like, and making that part of the process. There's so many things that you've both said where it's making it part of your day to day, and it makes that easier for you. And I think maybe more fun too, right? Both of you have mentioned LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Anthony, what's the way that you use Sales Navigator as part of this process?
Yeah, going back to what I was saying is one of my triggers could be job changes or if they posted on LinkedIn. And so if those are two of the signals, where do I find that information quickly? I find it in LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Or just another quick example, if I was looking for a company that was a target account, if they were hiring SDRs, then I go to their careers page. And so I know quickly where to find these nuggets of information that makes my outreach relevant. If you don't, you're going to spend a lot of time on research. And then if you can't find something because you spent too much time on research, you're just going to send a generic email and go on to the next activity. So for me, I like to use Sales Nav to find information about the prospects at my target accounts quickly and efficiently. And I'm happy to share what that looks like.
I know you shared a prospecting email. I want to peek at that really quick too. Can you walk us through this prospecting email and just talk us through your strategy here?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a big fan of Sam's show me approach, especially when you're targeting above the line leaders that you can invest time research. So here, what I usually try to do is that put something on into the subject in their world. So basically, this slogan, this motto, one goal, one network, one team, is the motto of the organization that I'm reaching out to. They announced it recently in their yearly summit. And I start with that. And when they see this, probably it's going to differentiate me from most of the emails they are receiving in the inbox because it's related to their daily work. And I use a segue mentioning their recent experience in this summit. And as an expert in this area, I basically tell that typically in these long summits and events, at the first few days, people are quite energized, but after active 1, 2 days, energy goes down quite a lot. And then I try to use a social proof, saying something like our customers, Bosch and Siemens, using Mentimeter to increase engagement in these events. And basically, these events are quite critical because they are deciding their strategic direction in these organizations and events. I basically try to highlight why it is important, use a social proof, and I use permission-based CTA here. I create a brief personal video tailored to your event setup and mind if I send it over. And I finish with a PS, once again, putting a personalization there. They visited us 1 year ago, our office. And so I basically highlight that and put the picture as well. So even though this person that I'm reaching out to didn't come to our office, I try to show that I have connections with their organization.
That goes back to the credibility piece that you were mentioning. Love it. I want to grab a couple of questions here out of the chat, if you don't mind. Let's see. Malachi asks, low connection rates when making cold calls. That's something that sticks out as a sore spot. Any thoughts on connection rates or improved data or anything around connection rates when you're making cold calls? Both of you make cold calls too.
Yeah, I can go ahead, Anthony, if you would like.
Yeah, listen, I think it's something that everyone struggles with, but it's not. I think the answer is pretty simple. You need to figure out the right data provider for you. And yeah, if you're having low connect rates, the only thing that really could be happening is either you're showing up as spam or you don't have the right data or the people that you're calling just don't pick up the phone. And you may need to figure out a better channel that they exist on. So like my last company, we sold to developers and CTOs. They didn't really pick up the phone, but there was like a CTO connection community. And so we started to send a couple people there, not to book meetings, but to build a connection, to build awareness. sometimes, and I know this is not the best answer because you want to connect with someone on the phone, but if you're not getting people to connect, probably shouldn't continue down that path because you're probably going to get the same result unless you change something. So you could either change your approach and your channel, or you can change the data that you're using. So a tactical takeaway is to have two data providers running at once. So you can A/B test and see which provides a higher connect rate. And I think ZoomInfo, Apollo, like there's a bunch of tools out there that will allow you to sign up for free that you can try. So if your company is invested in one, you can sign up on your own on a free one and see which one does better for you. So that would be my piece of advice. Either find a new channel or get new data. I think those are the two routes.
Completely agree. From my experience, Visa, the sponsor of this podcast, is pretty good in Europe, and they give 5 free mob numbers every month, I think. Apollo does the same. Lucia gives free as well. You can sign up a couple of them to test. And when you reach out to these organizations to do a trial, they are pretty generous. So you can run your own tests. We recently did that. One thing I want to add in terms of mindset is that when you call people and you cannot connect with them, it's still valuable. Because from my experience, I have some sequences, email and LinkedIn, and some other sequences that I start with calling and then send. If I cannot connect, then I send a voicemail, and then I send an email with the subject line, James voicemail, the name of the person that I'm reaching out, voicemail. And it has a very high open rate email. And then I try to basically mention that I called them. The reason I reach out is this. And I continue with LinkedIn connection requests referring to my email. So what this does is basically tells the customer prospect that I'm willing to invest time and I will be persistent. I basically reach out from different angles. So this sequence has much more reply rate than my generic email and LinkedIn. So even if I cannot with the customer, it's still effective.
Just using it to point to another channel, using it as another touch point. There's so much data around like people hearing our name and our company and our voice multiple times. Okay, this one got a couple upvotes. It's from an anonymous attendee. How would you approach outreach to a company? They're using a provider that gives engagement data or intent data. They're using demand-based. They see that there's engagement, but the person declined cookies. So you can't see who visited the site. You can just see that someone is engaging with the site. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I used to work at demand-based, so this is interesting, serendipitous moment and question. Yeah, I think intent data, website visits, it's all one piece of the pie, right? Like just because someone came to the website from the account, or even if it was you knew the person, doesn't mean that they're ready for a meeting. So this goes back to what I was saying. You need to have EQ and read the room. So how else has this company engaged before? Have they ever spoke to your company? Have they downloaded any content? Have they been to an event? Have they attended a webinar? All of this to say is that just because someone comes to your site, it doesn't mean that they're ready for a meeting or interested. It just may give you a inclining that you may want to prioritize them and look into them further. But just because someone comes to your site doesn't mean you stop what you're doing, write them an email or call them. You need to further investigate. And again, there's a number of different signals that you need to be looking at in addition to someone coming to the site. So I think just to answer your question more head on, if you see someone come to the site, maybe look at where they're coming from, like location. I know they can tell you location of the IP address. Go on Sales Nav and see, is there any specific personas that you target within that region? But again, just because someone comes to your site doesn't mean one time that they're the best fit. But if they've come to your site and also have opened your emails, people from that company have opened your emails, or you had a conversation in the past, or they downloaded content, or there's MQL, then that starts to give you, it should raise some level of interest on your end to further prioritize that account. But I would just use it as a sign that there is one of the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together, and you need to have more information before you reach out.
Yeah, I like that. I call them breadcrumbs. It's if there's one
Yes.
breadcrumb versus all the different trails, right? It's like you're going to follow a trail versus just one solo breadcrumb. Kevin brings up a really great point. Next question here. And there's almost 40% of this room that is are AEs. And he mentioned like the time, all the activities that end up on our plate. There's so many things. And on top of prospecting and outbounding, is there something, Firat, is there something that you did to prioritize what you're going to do day to day, or something when their time is limited that helps you through? Because I feel like we all feel like we're in that spot at one time or another where it's like there's 30 things to do, but I only have time for 5. What do I focus on?
Yeah, definitely. I first of all look at monetization. Prospecting is sometimes feels like we can do it when we feel like it, or we can do it when we have any time left. But it is so important when you think about it. If you don't have enough pipeline coverage, you're going to feel dependent on what you have. It's going to decrease your confidence and you're going to have low leverage in your negotiation. So prospecting, first of all, super important. So you have to decide and you have to commit. Basically, for me, almost every other day, I have 1 hour of phone prospecting now and also 1 hour of email prospecting. And when you have this prospecting blocks, and if you basically are respectful for those times, if your colleagues knows that during those prospecting times they don't reach out to you, you basically stick to it, and the results comes over time. Yeah, the priority and time blocking is key for me.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I do. I also will say most people are really good at being busy, but there's a difference between being busy and actually being productive. Like yesterday, I did 3 hours of focused work from 7:30 to about 10. And I wake up early. You don't have to do this, but I got a lot done. Like my day was like I could have stopped if I didn't have any calls, because that's how much I got done in just 3 hours because I was focused. Having intentionality behind what you're doing is really important. And how I actually do this is let's just say it was Tuesday at 5 p.m. I'm ready to finish up for the day. I look at Wednesday and then I look at all my white space around my calls. And unless you're back to back from 9 to 5, I'm going to push back and challenge you that you can find time to do a little bit of prospecting. And what I will say is this is where that 5 by 5 comes into play. So if you know you have 5 accounts and 5 contacts to add each day, then you have to find the white space in your calendar the next day to do those activities. And then Firat said you need to have specific time blocks with the actual activity so you don't leave room for negotiation. If you just have 20 minutes at a specific time block, you could probably make a few calls. You could probably send a couple of emails. It's better than nothing. And those daily deposits, while maybe small certain days, will add up over time. So you could either do 0 or you can do two emails a day, and then you're left with 10 emails versus I didn't have time or whatever the case was. I got a lot going on. And then you're left with a week of no prospecting. So find the white space in your calendar each day and build a system around how you actually execute. And like I said, know the outlets of where to find that relevant information. So if you know your 5 triggers and you know where to go to find those 5 triggers, you could probably get a lot more done versus I'm going to open up my laptop and figure out where I need to find this information, or what accounts I need to prioritize, or how many people I need to prioritize. Answer all those questions by building systems. Without it, you're going to get overwhelmed and you'll probably end up ignoring it. Just anything in life, you need to have systems around the actions you want to do so that when it comes time to make a decision, you're not left to figure out, I don't really feel like it. No, this is what I'm doing because it's part of my system and it's part of what I do each day. So that would be my answer.
I have to chime in with one more thing because I feel so passionate about it. I often found myself with like time in between Zoom calls, and it's what can I really get done before the next one. So I made myself a list of things that I can do if I have a 5-minute gap or a 10-minute gap, and I keep it on my desk. And some of those are go outside and stare at the sun and walk around and get some fresh air. And there's definitely like rest involved in that too, or fill up my water bottle. But some of them are things that I can do to make progress towards accounts or things on my to-do list. And it helps me when I feel like I'm just going to sit there and stare at the screen for 3 minutes, like to actually take action on something. Okay, rapid fire, quick answer, because we're almost at time here. Someone popped into the chat here that their industry doesn't really show up as much on LinkedIn or social media. Do you have a quick go-to where you get information when they're not active on LinkedIn or social?
Google News.
Google Alerts can be helpful if the organization not super small. If they publish something or any article, Google Alert is going to let you know about that. And maybe that's a good time and good piece of information to put in your copy.
Both of you mentioned hearing them on podcasts and stuff too. Like I turn to YouTube and I look up people's names. Is there somewhere where you go look for your prospects where they're speaking, where you can get sound bites of what they're talking about, thinking about?
Yeah, I just put in the chat. It's called listennotes.com. It's a podcast search engine.
Oh, cool.
Yes. So type in an executive. If they've been on podcasts, you'll be able to see all the podcasts they've been on and kind of the show notes. And you could test it on me if you want proof. There's all the podcasts that I've been on, the summaries, all that good stuff. And then you take that and turn it into, you got to find the relevant nugget within that podcast that ties back to the problem. You can't just say, I listened to your podcast. You need to say, on your podcast, you mentioned this relevant trigger. So just make sure you take it a step further than just understanding that they're on a podcast.
Awesome. I saw there's a couple questions that we didn't have time to get to today, but I want to drop your LinkedIns in the chat here so people can connect with you and discuss further. Firat and Anthony, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts and your outlines and the way that you approach things. We really appreciate you sharing with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been a great show.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one. Take care.